Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Christine Dixon of The Ordinary Sacred, and I am excited today to give you a little mini training on self-like parts. So, a faithful viewer of The Ordinary Sacred YouTube channel asked if I would do some teaching on self-like parts. And I'm happy to do that because I actually led a little training on self-like parts for my monthly IFS Practitioner Consultation Group a few months ago. So self-like parts can be a little enigmatic for people. They can be perplexing, frustrating, especially if you've been doing inner work for a while and you realize it's actually been done by a self-like part. But I want to tell you, you cannot get it wrong. Self-like parts are not bad. There are no bad parts. They have such good intention, and your system will show you if there's a self-like part blended with you that's not actually self. So I'm going to do a little training. I'm going to first go into how do you know when you are in self, and then what's the difference with the self-like part? What are some common self-like parts? How to find the tells of self-like parts, how to work with self-like parts in your clients, in yourself. This video is not just for IFS practitioners, but it's helpful for them. Or if you're just doing work in your own system, this will be helpful for you as well. And then I'll lead you through some exercises that you can do to help differentiate between self and self-like parts, how to befriend the self-like parts and unblend from them. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. There we are. Okay, so self-like parts, identifying, befriending, and unblending. So first, let's talk about what self is. This self with a capital S, or as my husband calls it, the big S self. Self is the core essence of every human that emerges when parts give space. It is not something that we have to make come forth, practice, develop. When our parts feel safe enough and they're able to soften, the self will naturally emerge. Self is innate. We are all born with a self. It is who we are before we're born and after we die. It is indestructible. It is not developed or learned. As our parts, those clouds in front of the sun, make a little space, the sun is always there shining. Self is the natural inner healer of the system. This is the beautiful, hopeful message of IFS, that we have within us a healer for all of our parts who've experienced trauma or wounding. Self is fluid, it's present, it's in the moment, and it's unattached to any agenda. And you can see even from this, kind of the opposite of that is what indicates a part. When it's very rigid or resistant, it's focused on past or future, and it's attached to some kind of outcome. Self is constantly connecting to parts. If you feel any resistance or blockage to connecting with a part, you know that you're blended with something that's not self. Self has no fear. Self knows that it's indestructible and that whatever you do not fear in the inner system cannot harm you. So the self has no fear. Any part that has any kind of trepidation or anxiety is a part, not self. Self is the inner witness. It is what sees, not what is seen. So I like that phrase, I see you, with the I being the self and the you being a part. And if you are visual in your inner system and you say there's a wounded, suffering part, and you see another part come in to caretake, to help it, that would be a self-like part. It would be a caretaking part because you're seeing it. The self is like your avatar in a video game where you see your hands in front of you. It's the one who sees. Self knows that its unconditionally loving presence will eventually heal parts, but it does not have a timeline for when this happens. So I was in a training with Bonnie Weiss once, and someone said, "What, doesn't self have an agenda to help, to heal, to love?" And she thought for a moment, and Bonnie said, "No, self just is loving and just knows that their loving presence will eventually lead to healing for a part, but it has no attachment to when or how that happens." And of course, the 8 C's of self. Self possesses genuine curiosity, compassion, calm, clarity, confidence, courage, creativity, and connectedness. And you can see in these words those soft qualities of curiosity and compassion and calm, but also very strong qualities of clarity, confidence, courage, and fluidity, creativity, and connectedness. And then the 5 P's of self. Self is playful, it's patient, yet persistent, always present, and has a very wide perspective. Parts see little pieces of the puzzle, get really fixated on certain needs or values, but the self is the all and perspective. Okay, so in contrast, self-like parts are often protective parts. They are always actually protective parts, and they are almost always managers. We'll see that they are usually kind of societally, culturally acceptable behaviors that are seen as good in the culture. Yes, culturally acceptable, praised for their efforts on the outside by other people. And self-like parts may carry some self-energy. All parts actually have a self. And so when parts are unburdened, they lend their self-energy to our system. It's when they're burdened that they have this sense of angst and impatience, and I have to do this or that, and fear, right? But some self-like parts are not necessarily burdened, and they can be very supportive, but they kind of defer to the self. They can be called on by the self. You know, things like organization skills and, you know, following the IFS or therapeutic model, those can be very supportive. They are not bad. The self can call on them. They have a quote unquote good agenda. Again, often this is seen as good socially. Often self-like parts believe they are the self. They believe they are the person. And a really helpful tip here I found is to check your Enneagram number. So if you're familiar with personality typing, you could also do this with Myers-Briggs. But my take is that personality types basically describe the cluster of parts that a person has developed to help them survive early childhood. So if you think about the Enneagram, I identified for a long time as an Enneagram 1, which is the perfectionist. So I had a really dominant perfectionist part that would have said, I am Christine, right? I also had a strong 2 wing. I had a lot of fawning and people pleasing and caretaking parts that would blend with me a lot of the time. I also have quite a bit of intellectual analyzing parts. I have teaching, performing parts, caretaking, you know, therapist parts, you know, with other people, rule following parts. If you go through the Enneagram, right, you can go through each one. There's performing parts. There's, you know, parts that want us to be special, to stand out in some way. There are parts that are very loyal to other people or to institutions. There are parts who are maybe the clown, the party person who is the life of the party. Or we might have challenger parts that challenge injustice. We might have peacemaking parts, right? And so these that are dominant for us particularly, it's a good way to get curious about what our own self-like parts might be. Unlike the self, though, self-like parts lack the lasting healing capacity of self. So sometimes if you're doing inner work and you're really trying to help and heal a wounded, exiled part, say, and it's just not responsive to you. It won't turn towards you. It hides from you. It won't talk to you. You're having a hard time getting anything from it. That's an indication that you are likely blended with a self-like part, because the other parts inside know when they're dealing with self or not. And they often won't talk to you if you're not blended with self. So you can just say, ah, interesting. Okay, let me check if I'm blended with a self-like part. All right. Some common self-like parts are therapist parts, right? And you can have this whether you are a practitioner or not, right? Kind of even if you're doing your own work inside, if you kind of know the IFS model and you're following all the steps, there's a part that keeps track of that, makes sure you're doing it right. Again, it can be supportive. Caretaking parts are often mistaken for self because they do have care and compassion within them. But the way you know that a caretaking part is burdened is because it has this sense of urgency. I have to help, I have to fix, or else. There's a real attachment to the trauma being healed now, right? You can also have intellectual parts that are trying to figure things out and analyze things. And sometimes we can mistake those for self. And the fix-it parts, right? Again, they have such good intention. All of these have very good intention. They just aren't self. They're attached to some kind of agenda and usually are protecting something and have fears. And so the solution is for the self to actually turn toward them and get to know them so that they can make space for self. You can have spiritual parts, right? We talked about spiritual bypassing. So spiritual parts, again, they might look good to your cultural community, or, you are meditating a lot, or you are practicing gratitude, saying positive affirmations, memorizing your scriptures, doing all the right things, but any part that tries to push out other parts, that doesn't have room maybe for the negative feeling parts, the parts that feel anxiety or anger or sadness or disgust or frustration, right? Or even excitement, right? If they're trying to make you calm, don't be excited. Anything that's pushing away any part of you is another part. The self, again, has room for all of it. All of it can coexist. And I want to just say a little side note here about what my husband Brian calls godlike parts. These can be really present, particularly with people who have a lot of religious background and religious burdens. These are parts that are really hard to question. They come out and they say, this is what the Holy Scripture says, whether it's the Bible or another Holy Scripture. This is what my tradition says. This is what my religious leaders say. So in essence, it's from God and it cannot be questioned. It's really difficult to question. Just a little example for me, there's a scripture in the Bible. I grew up in a evangelical Christian home, and the Bible was the authority, right? And there's a scripture that says to consider others as better than yourselves. And for the longest time, it's like, I can't question this, right? This sounds very good, right? Consider others as better than yourselves. But eventually I realized, wait, for me and my system, I took that to a burdensome degree of putting everyone above myself, sacrificing myself, allowing myself to be abused and walked on. And so parts of me really needed to be able to challenge that and say, no, consider others as equal to myself, bring myself up to equal value to others, and that I am most highly equipped to care for myself. So, and then when I care for myself, I'm better able to give from overflow to other people. But it was very challenging for my system to question that, because it was like these godlike parts that held things as scripture, essentially. And if you have parts like that, they'll present themselves as self. Or if you have clients with parts like that, yourself would never try to convince them otherwise, try to convince them they're wrong. The self won't do that, doesn't have agenda. The self will just feel very loving and curious toward these godlike parts and say, how did you learn that? How did it keep you safe? What are you afraid would happen if you question that? So yeah, it can be really interesting to work with godlike parts. Okay. You might also have wise or advice-giving parts, performing parts, guarded parts. These are parts that kind of keep a little bit of a block or a space between you and the client, or your client's self and the part they're working with, or between, if you're doing your own inner work, between you and a part. You just feel a little bit of a disconnect, a little bit of a maybe a clinical attitude toward the part. There's not connection. Like I said before, self feels very connected to whatever part is in front of it. So if you feel any kind of disconnection, numbness, fogginess, that's indication that you might be blended with a part, or a part just might be blocking the self a little bit. Okay, so how to identify a self-like part? We've talked a little bit about this. A self-like part will be agenda-driven. It will have some kind of idea about when and how things should happen. We need to, like if you're a practitioner, we need to get to the exile in this session. We need to do this. It becomes very attached. Maybe there's a target part and it says, got to go to this part. And it's not flexible with, but other parts are coming in and that need attention first, right? It kind of has its eyes set toward a goal. And a self-like part feels impatient and urgent. You can feel it in your body. We'll do an exercise with that. But and it always wants to fix or help. So it has a good intention, but it feels urgent angstiness about it. Can also have a figure it out or do it right energy, right? Like I have to figure this out, or I have to do it right, or else. You might also have a confusion or a blankness, right? Sometimes you might come to a point where you're kind of like, I don't know what to do here. And there's a little bit of panic usually around that, whether it's in your own system or a client system. And usually you can turn toward that confusion or panicked part and say, I see you. I know you just want things to go well. Can you give me space to let the self lead? There can be a part that has a fixation on time. Oh my gosh, we only, have 10 minutes left and we're only here. Again, there'll be a kind of a sense of panic there. Like I said earlier, when parts that you're focusing on will not talk to you, or they will not talk to the client's self, it's an indication that there might be a self-like part there. And you can get curious. Sometimes you can ask the part in front of you, who do you see when you look at me? Or who do you see when you look at the client? And that'll give you a good indication of what the client might be blended with. There are lots of body sensations, postures, different things that will be tells, indications that you might be blended with a part, like constriction in the throat, any kind of tension in your muscles, your jaw, shoulders, neck, hands, stomach, kind of a leaning forward, urgent feeling, any kind of agitation in your body, a lack of calm, maybe a holding of the breath. It can be overt or it can be subtle energy. Another indication might be your voice, right? You might start talking fast and high like this, and that will be a tell that, oh, there's a part that's feeling some kind of franticness. I said this before, but if you're doing your own inner work or your client is, and they see a part helping another part, this is likely a helper caretaking part. And again, it's not bad. That part has such beautiful intention, but the client or yourself, who's the avatar, can then embrace both, right? The wounded part and the caretaking part together. All right. So how to unblend from self-like parts. And again, you can do this if you're a practitioner or if you're doing your own work. First thing I really recommend is just a noticing practice, just getting in the habit of stopping, just even for 10 seconds. I like to first check outside of myself to bring myself to the present. What do I see, hear, feel, taste, smell? And then I make a YOU turn, come inside. I imagine it's like I'm a scuba diver going under the water to see what's alive under the water. And at that point, I'm looking for my pets, physical sensations in my body, emotional energy, and thoughts. And I'm just observing and maybe naming them and saying, I see you, you're welcome here, you're not alone. This is not a fixing or analyzing practice. You might notice parts that want to fix and analyze, but you just say, oh, I see you. You're not alone. I'm with you. It's just noticing whatever's alive in you in a given moment. Some people will like to set a little timer, at random times throughout the day and just stop and say, okay, what's alive in me right now? Again, it can be very quick, but it's a really helpful practice to just begin noticing the nuances of parts as they show up. And of course, you'll want to do deeper work with self-like parts to gain their trust and learn what their specific tells are. Like if there's a caretaking part, intellectual part, advice-giving, performing part, spiritual part, therapist part, right? One by one, really spend some time getting to know them, because then when they come up in a session, you will recognize them. You can call them by name. Oh, hey, Sophie, I see you. I have a rehearsing part named Sophie, and she'll try to come in and I'll just say, oh, I see you. I appreciate you. Can you let me lead? And see how it goes. I also believe that the number one thing you can do as a practitioner is to check in with your own system right before a session. I usually will spend 10 to 20 minutes before every individual or group session meeting with my parts. And this might be parts related to the session or anything in my life, just whatever's alive in me, because as I turn toward those parts and give them loving attention, they relax and they make more room for myself to show up in the session. That is the number one gift I can give a client, is to be present and in self with all those 8 C's with them, so that I'm not blended with parts. That's far more effective than going over my client's notes, rehearsing the session, far more effective than that. And then during the session, you might notice the tells of self-like parts or any burden parts when they arise in a session. Self-like parts are just a little more subtle, right? So you'll notice their tells. And then when you do, you can just stop, take a breath, turn toward them lovingly, appreciate their good intention, say, I see you, I'm here with you. Can you let me lead? And you can, it doesn't, there are parts that think, oh gosh, I can't do that. I can't break the flow of the session, but it's actually very much worth it to do this. If it then helps you be in self, then to continue the session from a part. So, or if you're doing your own inner work, it's well worth it to turn toward parts. And it feels like a not direct path, like a zigzag path, but it's actually the most efficient to get where you want to go. And I am a big proponent of disclosing to clients when parts come in. Now, that doesn't mean you have to give them all the details. This is a part that was burdened when I was 3, and but I might just say, oh, I'm noticing a part. I'm going to take a moment to let that part know that I can lead. And I think this is a wonderful way to model for clients, right? Some other parts of us will think, oh, I will look bad, unprofessional if I have parts that come in. No, we are human. We will always have parts. Our goal is not to get rid of our parts. It's to be in relationship with our parts, ourself in a relationship with parts. We listen to the parts that have frustration, agitation, sadness, anxiety. We listen to them. That's what a self-led system is. And so you're really modeling a self-led system. You might say, hey, I'm noticing a part over here that wants to give a piece of advice from something this part experienced. Is it okay to share that? Or I'm noticing some younger parts of me that are really empathizing with you because they experienced something similar. Or I notice a part that's really worried about the time right now and how much time we have left. So I'm going to just tend to that part for a moment, right? It's actually really good modeling, I think. So as a therapist or coach, your job first and foremost is to be the parts detector of your own parts. Again, this is by far the best thing you can give your client, is that you have tended to the parts in you so that they are relaxed and give yourself enough space to show up for your client. Then you are the parts detector of your client's parts. And once your self is available, it'll be very easy to see your client's parts. Being self-led in a session can look a lot like noticing and naming your own parts in real time. I notice a part in me. I'm asking them to give me space. Self-like parts are not bad. Self and parts coexist. Self can show parts appreciation, right? So it's just about the self getting to know these parts, noticing when they come up, giving them experiments and experience, letting the self lead so they can see that it goes better, right? The self is not intimidated by open space. The parts are the ones that have to fill the space and have to go, right? The self can say, it's okay to sit in the unknown for a moment. I know that it'll be okay. But the parts need evidence that that is going to be effective. But once your self-like parts trust yourself, they have this experience, then they can take on supportive roles and relax back. And so then the self might call in a part like, hey, timekeeping part, can you help support me during this session? Maybe set a timer or, let us know when 10 minutes are left in the session. And remember that you are always doing the best that you can. So be very kind to yourself in all your parts. When you notice that a self-like part's been leading your own inner work or work with a client, you can thank them, appreciate them, get to know them. It's all good. All right. So now I'm going to show you 3 exercises that you can do to really get a feel for the difference between self and parts. So the first thing I would do is think of a scenario when you experience the quality of self on the left, and then notice how it feels in your body. Think of a scenario that experienced the opposite of the C word, an activated part on the right. Notice how that feels on your body and toggle between the two, and you'll really feel the difference. So for example, think of a time when you felt genuinely curious about a person, a topic, an event, and you were fascinated and intrigued, and you basically have beginner's mind, learner's mind, right? And if you feel it in your body, it's like you're moving toward it. Your eyes are open, your face is relaxed, you're engaged, you're open-hearted, soft, right? And feel that in your body. And then you can go to a time when you felt very closed-minded. Maybe there was someone in front of you that you absolutely disagreed with, and you thought, they're wrong, I'm right, no, this is the way it is. You were certain, right? Like as I'm feeling it, you can see I'm pounding on the on the desk, right? And so I'm backing away, I'm tense, I'm closed, my fists are together, no, right? And then you want to toggle between the two. So you can go, oh, oh, no, right? And really feel the difference between those two. Again, it's not either or. It's really about bringing the open, curious self to the part who feels closed-minded and certain. The self will not resist or counteract that part. It will include it. It will accept it. It will get curious about it. And they can coexist. But really toggling between the two helps you have that nuanced detector of, it's like the self is like this placid lake, right? That's very calm on the surface. And when the parts get activated, it's like stones are thrown in it and the ripples are going out. And so to be able to detect those ripples when that happens, right? But the lake still holds them within itself, if that makes sense. All right, so for the rest of this, I'm not going to go through it extensively. You can pause or take a screenshot and go through each one of these, but really feel a time when you felt compassion towards the suffering of someone in front of you versus judgmental, calling them evil, kind of, or angry at them. And again, it's not good, bad. It's just feeling the difference so that the left quality can be with the right. A time when you felt calm in your body versus agitated. Toggle between the two. A time when you felt clarity about something versus confused. Confident versus insecure. Courageous versus fearful and anxious. Creative and flowing versus blocked. Connected versus disconnected and isolated and alone. So you can practice doing one of these a day. You can do them all at once, whatever you want to do. But again, it doesn't have to take a long time. Just imagine the scenario, toggle between the two, feel it in your body. So you can really feel the nuances and the differences. All right, the second exercise is an unblending exercise that I first learned from Lot Kelly that I really love. So you first start with I am, and you fill in. So I have it here geared toward practitioners, something that you're feeling towards your client, right? Because you're trying to get assess what parts might be reacting to certain clients that might show up in a session. But you can do this with anything in your system. And you might say it 3 or 4 times to really feel it. And the I am is when you're blended, right? I am frustrated or I am annoyed, right? This is the part really feels like it's you. And as you move through each statement, you'll begin to feel less and less blended and have more access to self, to curiosity and compassion, because unblending just means you make what feels like one become two. Now there's I see you. So you would go from I am annoyed to I feel annoyed. And now you're really feeling what that feels like in your body. And then I am aware of feeling annoyed. Now there's two. There's the one who's aware of the feeling of annoyance in your body. And then I am aware that a part of me is feeling annoyed. And now you've really made this separation of the awareness that is yourself and the part that's feeling annoyed. And then the self can listen to the annoyed part. Why are you feeling annoyed? What happened? What boundary was crossed, or what unhealed trauma did it activate for you? And I would also maybe add, in a client situation, or if you're, talking about another person, I'm aware that a part of me is feeling annoyed with a part of my client, right? Okay. And you can fill in the blank with all kinds of things. I am impatient, frustrated, fearful, confused, overwhelmed, wanting this to go well, wanting my client to feel better, wanting to fix this problem, right? And you can go from I am wanting to fix this to I'm aware that a part of me really wants to fix this. And you can feel affection for that part and its good intention. That separation allows you to have access to the you that is not a part, that can hold all the parts of you and the client. Okay, final exercise. And again, this can be for a practitioner with a client, or it might be for you with a person in your life. So clients or anybody in our lives can be wonderful tormentors, as Dick calls them, because they legitimately activate parts of us that torment us. We feel tormented, but they're mentors because they're teachers. They're pointing toward the parts of us that need loving attention. And so they're very helpful in that way. So you might ask, what types of parts in your client, or maybe in, your family member, coworker, friend, etc., what you can bring up a person and say, what parts in me get activated by them? Are there distressed parts, angry parts, dissociative parts, caretaking parts, advice-giving parts, fixing parts, right? What gets activated in me around this particular person? And what self-like parts tend to guide my interactions with this person? Just get curious about who shows up in your inner family. And can you feel curious about why these parts come up, how they learn to protect you, what their fears are, how long they've been doing their job, how old they are, how old they think you are. Usually these are parentified child parts. These managers, they're like this little boy that is playing this role. And when they realize that there is actually a self, or an adult self in the room, they're like, oh, thank God. I can stop doing this charade and I can go back to resting and playing. But they've been working hard, usually doing something that they ultimately are not effective at doing for a very long time. So that can help you appreciate their good intentions. You can update them. Hopefully you are in a safe situation. Your adult self always will know what to do. Some people will say, oh, but I didn't have good parenting. I don't know, proper adult things to do. I said, no, yourself innately knows. It does, I promise. And if the other parts that are concerned about it will give space, yourself will know how to reparent your young parts, how to show up for other people in your life, your clients, etc. And then finally, can you go to what they protect? Because self-like parts, just like all protective parts, cannot stop doing what they're doing until what they protect is healed, until they gain experience with the self, knowing that the self is actually capable of helping and healing what they protect. Then they can naturally relax from their urgency and their angst and their agenda. All right. So that was a lot. But thank you if you stayed with me for this whole mini training on self-like parts. If you have any questions about self-like parts in yourself or in your clients, or you want to share stories about your own self-like parts in the comments, I would love for you to do that.